Kira had been trading at the Nexus station markets for 3 years now, and she thought she'd seen everything. The sprawling marketplace stretched across 5 levels of the station's commercial district, filled with species from 100 worlds hawking goods that ranged from mundane to incomprehensible. She'd grown comfortable with the chittering Vrex merchants, the towering Gormath traders, and even the gelatinous Pulix, who communicated through color changes. But she'd never had followers before. The 2 small creatures had appeared behind her somewhere around the spice vendor's stall. Kira first noticed them when she stopped to examine a crate of Deltarian root vegetables. They were barely knee-high, covered in sleek black fur with distinctive white markings along their faces. Their eyes were huge and golden, pupils slit like a cat's, and their ears swiveled independently to track every sound in the busy market. When Kira moved to the next stall, they followed. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on her shopping list. The cargo hauler she worked on needed supplies for the next 3-month run, and Captain Morris had entrusted her with the station credits and explicit instructions not to get distracted. But the 2 cubs kept pace with her, maintaining a distance of exactly 3 meters, their heads swiveling back and forth as they took in the market's chaos. At the fruit stand, Kira paused to select some earth-grown apples. They were expensive this far out, but the crew had been craving something familiar. She picked up a particularly red specimen, checking it for bruises. A small claw tapped her leg. Kira looked down to find one of the cubs, staring up at her with those enormous eyes. Up close, she could see the sharp little teeth behind its lips and the retractable claws on its 3-fingered hands. The creature pointed at the apple with one claw. "Is this food?" it asked in perfect, if slightly accented, common tongue. Kira nearly dropped the apple. In 3 years of trading, she'd learned that most species young didn't venture into markets alone, and they certainly didn't approach humans to ask questions about produce. "Yes," she managed. "It's called an apple. It's a fruit from my homeworld." The second cub pushed forward, pointing at a pile of golden melons from Hexus Prime. "Is this food?" "Also food," Kira confirmed, bewildered. The first cub's tail swished with what might have been excitement. It picked up a small purple vegetable that resembled a turnip. "Is this food?" "That's a Vortan bulb. It's food, but humans can't eat it. It would make us sick." Both cubs tilted their heads in unison, a gesture so synchronized it was almost unsettling. The first one carefully set the bulb back down, then pointed at a basket of something that looked like twisted brown branches. "Is this food?" Kira glanced at the Vrex merchant, who watched the exchange with his compound eyes glittering in amusement. "It depends on who's asking," Kira said. "For Vrex, yes. For humans, no. For you." She paused, realizing she had no idea what species these cubs were. "What do your people eat?" The cubs looked at each other, then back at her. The second one spoke this time, its voice slightly higher pitched. "We don't know. We're trying to learn." That statement sent a chill down Kira's spine. How could children not know what their own species ate? She crouched down to their level, setting her basket aside. "Where are your parents?" "Deceased," the first cub said matter-of-factly. "Ship accident. We survived in the escape pod for 67 days. The station authorities found us yesterday." 67 days. Kira's mind raced. Escape pods had emergency rations, but those were typically species-specific. If these cubs had been in a pod designed for another species, or if their pod's food stores had been damaged. "What did you eat in the pod?" she asked gently. "Nutripaste," the second cub replied. "Gray, tasteless. The medical officer said it would keep us alive but was not optimal nutrition. She said we needed real food. So we came here." The first cub pointed at a display of what looked like thick noodles. "Is this food?" Kira stood slowly, her shopping suddenly feeling far less important. These two had been wandering the market pointing at random items, trying to figure out what their species could safely consume. The station's medical facilities were good, but xenobiology was complex. Without knowing the cub's species, the doctors probably couldn't recommend a proper diet beyond the generic Nutri-Paste that kept most oxygen breathers alive. "Come with me," Kira said, making a decision that Captain Morris would probably yell at her for later. "I'm going to buy some different foods and we'll figure out what works for you." The cub's ears perked forward in what she was learning to recognize as interest. They followed as she moved through the market with new purpose, selecting items from various stalls. She picked up protein cubes from a gourmet vendor, dried fish from a Terran supplier, some kind of spiced jerky from a species she didn't recognize, and an assortment of fruits and vegetables from across known space. At each stop, the cubs pointed and asked their question, "Is this food?" And each time, Kira answered honestly, "Yes, but not for everyone. Yes, and safe for most species. No, that's a decorative item. Yes, but it's still alive, so probably not a good choice." Other shoppers gave them strange looks. A human woman with two small predators trailing behind her, pointing at goods with their sharp claws, was apparently unusual even in a place as diverse as Nexus Station. Kira ignored the stares and focused on her task. The vegetable seller, an elderly Pulix who shifted to warm orange tones as they approached, seemed particularly taken with the cubs. It offered them each a small piece of something crisp and green. The cubs looked at Kira for permission. "It's safe," the Pulix said, its translation device rendering its color patterns into words. "Many species enjoy. Very mild." The cubs accepted the samples cautiously. They sniffed them first, their small noses wrinkling, then took tiny, careful bites. They chewed slowly, thoughtfully. The first cub's tail began swishing again. "Good," it declared. "Sweet, crunchy." The Pulix turned bright yellow with pleasure and added several more of the vegetables to Kira's basket, waving away her credits. "For the little ones," it said. "They have good manners." As they continued shopping, a pattern emerged. The cubs were drawn to protein sources, especially dried meats and fish. They showed less interest in grains and starches. When Kira picked up some sharp cheese from a Terran colony supplier, both cubs' pupils dilated and they leaned forward with obvious interest. "Obligate carnivores," Kira muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "Or close to it." The first cub looked up at her. "What does that mean?" "It means your bodies are designed to eat mostly meat," Kira explained. "Some species are like that. My friend's cat back on Earth was an obligate carnivore, sweet little thing, but she needed meat to survive." "We are not cats," the second cub said firmly. "We are Catherine." Kira froze. Catherine. She'd heard that name before, always whispered with a mixture of fear and respect. The Catherine were one of the galaxy's apex predator species, rare and reclusive. They rarely left their homeworld, and when they did, it was usually as mercenaries or hunters. Their military prowess was legendary. They were strong, fast, and had reflexes that made most other species look sluggish by comparison. And Kira had two juveniles following her through a market, asking about fruit. She looked down at the cubs with new understanding. Those sharp claws weren't just for show. Those golden eyes could probably see in spectrums she couldn't imagine. The way they moved with such perfect balance, the alertness in their posture, the way their ears tracked every sound. These weren't just curious children. They were predators in training, their instincts already sharp, even if their knowledge was incomplete. But right now, they were also two orphans who didn't know what they could safely eat. Kira adjusted her grip on her basket and kept walking. At a stall specializing in preserved meats, she struck up a conversation with the vendor, a gruff Terran who claimed to have traveled to over 300 worlds. When she mentioned the Catherine, his eyes widened. Catherine cubs, he said, looking around until he spotted them examining a display of dried insects. Haven't seen a Catherine in 15 years. Thought they kept their young on the homeworld. Their parents died in a ship accident, Kira said quietly. They're trying to figure out what to eat. The vendor's expression softened. He selected several packages of various meats, dried, smoked, and spiced. These should work. Protein-rich, minimal preservatives. If they're anything like other predator species, they'll need a high-protein diet, especially while growing. He added them to her basket and refused payment. On the house. Lost my own kids in the Proxima raids. Wouldn't wish that on anyone. Not even Catherine. The cubs had attracted a small crowd by now. Word had spread through the market about the human woman and the predator cubs. Vendors emerged from their stalls to look, some offering suggestions, others simply watching with curiosity. A few kept their distance, wariness evident in their body language. The Catherine reputation preceded them, even when they were small enough to trip over their own tails. But most approached with kindness. A gourmet trader offered samples of protein bars designed for carnivorous species. A Vrex merchant provided a data pad with nutritional information about various market goods. A traveling doctor, some species Kira didn't recognize, volunteered to scan the cubs and provide a basic dietary analysis. Through it all, the cubs continued their questions. Is this food? Is this food? Is this food? And the market answered. By the time Kira's basket was full, she'd accumulated not just food, but information. The cubs had a basic dietary profile now, compiled from advice offered by a dozen species who understood nutrition better than she did. They needed high protein, moderate fat, minimal carbohydrates. Certain minerals were essential. Some vegetables were acceptable in small amounts. Chocolate was absolutely forbidden, as it was toxic to most predator species. Kira's personal credit account was significantly lighter, but the cubs each carried small bags of food samples to try. They walked beside her now instead of behind her, their initial wariness replaced by something that looked almost like trust. As they approached the market's exit, the first cub tugged on her sleeve. "Why did you help us?" Kira paused, considering the question. Why had she helped? She had work to do, supplies to buy, a schedule to keep. These weren't her responsibility. They weren't even her species. By all accounts, when these cubs grew up, they'd be dangerous. Catherine adults were not creatures to trifle with. But right now, they were just two kids who'd lost everything and didn't know what foods were safe to eat. "Because you asked," Kira said simply. "And because everyone needs to eat." The second cub tilted its head. "Humans are strange. The station authorities gave us shelter and medicine, but they did not walk with us through the market. They did not teach us about food." "They probably didn't know what you needed," Kira said. "And they're busy. Nexus Station processes thousands of beings every day." "But you are also busy," the first cub observed. "You had a list. We saw it. You have not finished your shopping." Kira glanced at her data pad where her half-completed shopping list glowed accusingly. Captain Morris was definitely going to yell at her, but she found she didn't particularly care. "I'll finish it," she said. But this was more important. The cubs exchanged another one of those synchronized looks. Then the first one held out its small, clawed hand. In its palm sat a data chip. "Our parents were traders," it said, "before the accident. We inherit their accounts, their contacts, their roots. The station authorities told us we are wealthy by galactic standards. We do not understand wealth. We do not understand trade. But we understand debt." Kira shook her head. "You don't owe me anything." "Humans are strange," the second cub repeated, "but we will remember. When we are grown, if you need help, you call. The Catherine pay their debts." Something in the cub's tone made the words feel less like a child's promise and more like a binding contract. Kira took the data chip carefully, sensing that refusing would be an insult. "I'll remember," she said. The cub's ears flicked forward in what she now recognized as satisfaction. They adjusted their small bags of food samples and turned toward the station's residential sector. "Wait," Kira called. "Do you know how to prepare this food? Some of it needs to be cooked." Both cubs looked back at her. "Is cooking food?" the first one asked. Kira checked the time. Captain Morris was definitely going to yell at her, but she'd already committed to this course, and she wasn't about to send two carnivorous cubs off with raw meat and no idea what to do with it. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you." The cubs followed her back into the market, toward the prepared food section where vendors demonstrated cooking techniques. As they walked, the first cub pointed at a display of kitchen tools. "Is this food?" "No," Kira said, unable to suppress a smile. "But it helps you make food." "Humans are very strange," the cub concluded, "but useful." Behind them, the market bustled with its usual chaos. 1,000 species trading goods from across the galaxy. Nobody noticed one human woman teaching two small predators about the difference between food and cooking implements. Nobody recognized it as the beginning of something significant. But Kira would remember this day years later, when the Kethrin's reputation for honoring debts proved to be more than just rumor. When those two cubs grew into formidable adults who remembered the human who walked with them through a market and answered their questions with patience. For now, though, she just focused on teaching them which foods needed heat and which were safe to eat raw, while they pointed at every pot, pan, and utensil and asked their now familiar question, "Is this food?" And every time she answered,